You're listening to Crime Uncovered.
All right, we're back. Thank you so much for tuning in to Crime Uncovered. I'm your host, Sam Britt. Crime Uncovered is a podcast all about crime. I will tackle the most compelling and newsworthy events happening in the criminal justice system and have guests each show to give their take on what's going on in their field. It feels good to be back in the studio. Joining me on this episode today of Crime Uncovered via Zoom call, the Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI Laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, Ray Cook III.
Hey, good morning, Sam.
Thanks so much for being with me. I appreciate it. During our interview, we'll discuss what it really means to be a part of the Bureau, a part of the lab, and most importantly, how crime becomes uncovered. Ray, just to get things started off, I would love to hear more about your background, how you got into the FBI, what you do now. Just give me a little taste of that. Also, the listeners too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. In just a couple of weeks, actually, we'll be celebrating my 28th anniversary with the FBI. So I got started as a very young man, right outside of, right after college. In fact, the very first job that I applied to was with the FBI laboratory. And my degree is in a hard science. When I went through that process to apply to be part of the FBI laboratory, I was ultimately unsuccessful. And that left me certainly feeling, a little rejected, but picked myself up. And I said I was going to find my way not only into the FBI, but ultimately back into the laboratory. And so I applied and joined a different part of the FBI where I became a professional staff employee or working essentially surveillance cases. So I worked some very high profile surveillance in the first 6 years of my career with the FBI. And then I became an FBI special agent. Immediately after graduating from the FBI Academy, I was assigned to a very small town called Minot, North Dakota. And that's a specialty office where we work a lot of crimes on Native American Indian reservations.
Okay.
And that's where I worked for the first 3 years of my special agent career. After that, I transferred to the Washington field office back here in Washington, D.C. And in those 3 years, I worked public corruption on Capitol Hill. So the cases that we worked were the highest profile public corruption cases that the U.S. government was charged with investigating. After those years working in public corruption, I moved to the training division where I took on an instructor role, teaching firearms to new students, as well as certifying FBI agents as firearms instructors.
Okay.
I did that role for a number of years. Then I moved to a new location, also within Quantico, where I became what is called a unit chief of the defensive systems unit. In that role, Sam, we did a lot of progressive movement for the FBI, and probably the biggest movement forward was during my time there. We transitioned the FBI back to 9mm. So that unit was in charge of all guns, bullets, and body armor for the FBI. So that was a big transition back to 9mm during my time in DSU, because for many decades it was thought that for bullets, bigger is better, and that's just not the case when it comes to ballistic performance. So after that, I transitioned back to Washington field office, had a number of leadership roles there, working again some counterintelligence investigations, and then I was promoted to Alabama. In Alabama, I was known as an assistant special agent in charge. So for the lower half of the state of Alabama, I was in charge of all the criminal investigations that the FBI was undertaking. So I worked there for a number of years, and then I had my first opportunity to come back to the laboratory. And I did that, Sam. I did that in 2021, where I became the chief of the forensic response section. The forensic response section of the FBI is essentially the operational arm of the laboratory division, where they deploy to major crime scenes, shooting investigations, as well as non-traditional forensic type of crime scenes, meaning CBRN type of work. I did that for a little over a year, and then was fortunate enough to be promoted to the Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI Laboratory, which is where I am today. And happy to be visiting with you on my journey, and specifically on what the FBI laboratory brings to investigations. In my day-to-day role, I am the lead for all functions of the FBI laboratory.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I mean, that is a very awesome background that you have. So I'd like to dive deeper into that, just about your roles and what you do now as well. And it seems like the average Joe wouldn't know what the man behind a case does in terms of examining scientific evidence. So can you walk us through what you do in the FBI laboratory?
Certainly. So I think a lot of my experiences that drove me back to the laboratory were formed throughout my, classic my education, but also through my early FBI experiences.
Okay.
I mentioned that I was employed with the FBI right out of college. During that time, I started with the FBI in the mid 90s. And during that time, the FBI stood up its inaugural hazardous materials response team. And for me, having that science background, I was very intrigued by that team being stood up. And I joined that team in the late 90s, and was part of that team when both the attacks of September 11th, as well as the anthrax letters from that same year, started to circulate throughout the United States. And so for me, understanding what it took to gather evidence, to submit evidence, and to have evidence produce additional leads for finding, the subject of said investigations was very much a part of my early FBI DNA. When I graduated from the academy and I was assigned as an FBI agent officially charged with investigating federal crimes, I mentioned that I was assigned to a Native American Indian reservation in North Dakota. In that role, I was oftentimes my own support mechanism. I did not have the ability to bring in an evidence response team. I did not oftentimes even have a partner to work with. Often I was charged with investigating things by myself, and those were a myriad of cases, from drug investigations, public corruption, to violent crime and murder. It was through a number of interactions during that assignment with the laboratory's task force on Indian country cases that I got even more intrigued by the work being done by the laboratory. And that, along with my engagement with the U.S. Attorney's Office, really drove me to understanding from a field perspective, from an investigative perspective, what evidence meant and how it could be utilized to further add value to your case. And I did that job for a number of years, and was surprised by the techniques and the amount of information that a piece of evidence could return to an investigator. So I would say that is my field perspective. That is my investigator perspective. Now that I'm the Deputy Assistant Director at the FBI laboratory itself, I am continually amazed by the processes, by the techniques, by the sheer ability of the team to help find probative value in the evidence that is submitted to them by the FBI agents, by investigators. And I should add that we're not just a laboratory that serves the FBI. We do assist with state and local cases, and at no cost. We do that at no cost to the investigative agency. But the techniques, the laboratory is split into essentially five sections, but essentially three forensic sections. One of those is biometrics. The other one is technical exploitation of explosive devices, essentially. That's our TDAC component. That's in another location in Huntsville, Alabama. And then our scientific analysis section. So you should consider biometrics your traditional forensics, latents, and DNA. You should consider your scientific analysis section as your firearms and tool marks, your questions documents, your cryptanalysis, and then your TDAC is your improvised explosive or improvised threats. So, like I said, for many years, that was focused on the IEDs coming out of the war in Iraq.
And you touch on all of those in your day to day.
Every single day.
All right.
That's right.
That's very interesting. So, um, you touched on a little bit your investigative background too, and how that helped kind of push you into the laboratory a little bit and get you more interested in that field. So, what does that job as an investigative agent entail? Um, and is there as much secrecy as some people think in to the job itself?
I think that's a great question, and I certainly love the throwback to the famous if I tell you I have to kill you, which of course for most all of the matters that we do is just not the case. If you are working on some very highly sensitive investigations, particularly in the counterterrorism and the counterintelligence world, there are certainly those cases which are what we call highly compartmentalized and absolutely cannot be shared outside of the working circles, only with those folks that are need to know.
Right.
However, the vast majority of our work, is we are charged with, protecting American people and defending the Constitution, and most of that is outward facing, and you see that with the many things that we are able to accomplish as an organization. As an investigator, when we're talking about those cases where it can have a reliance on traditional evidence, you work very closely with not only your substantive squad. So if you're on a criminal squad, you do work with them to kind of bounce ideas off of each other, especially if you get to the point where you're lacking in additional leads, putting fresh perspective on the evidence to generate hopefully some additional leads or additional course direction. But also you're working with your U.S. Attorney's Office, because they will be the ones by the case law, to be able to tell you what criteria are needed from your evidence to be able to prove the crime as it relates to the certain criminal code. So
Right.
I don't want to. It's certainly not a one-person perspective. There are people with varying degrees of experience working the same violations. We have mentoring positions where we have training agents, and we always have the ability to go to them and kind of ask their opinion if we're pushing things in the right direction. And then there's that prosecutorial side. If you are proving elements of a crime that won't ultimately lead to a prosecution, then you might be going down the wrong road.
Okay.
When it comes to evidence and what constitutes an evidence of value, a lot of times that is derived from those conversations, both within the investigative group, but also with the prosecuting office. Once the evidence arrives at the laboratory, it is the expectation of the laboratory that the agent will know what it is that they're looking for. We don't receive a piece of evidence and the agent says, "Hey, tell us everything you can about it." We'll receive a piece of evidence and they'll say, "I need DNA," or "I need fingerprints," or maybe they'll say, "Can I get DNA or fingerprints or both?" Or they'll send a document and they'll say, "Hey, this looks to be a cipher. Can you break this? Can you break this cipher through your cryptanalysis?" Or shell casings. "Hey, we have 3 guns and 5 shell casings. Can you tell me which shell casing came from which gun?" So we the laboratory don't drive the direction of the case, nor do we tell the case agent what evidence they should be looking for. That is predetermined through their investigative work as well as their conversation with the U.S. attorneys. And then when they present the evidence to us, we have a much more robust conversation with that contributing agent to say, "Okay, what are you asking us to do?" Right. And then we're able to tell them, "Hey, we can do that. We can't do that. We may be able to do that."
So when there is, excuse me. So when there is some type of lead or tip in a case that they give you, it's beneficial to you, but it's also beneficial to the case, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. We can't drive the investigation from where we are without knowing what it is that they're trying to accomplish and what it is they're asking us to find for them. In other words, just as another example, let's just say they submit a bloody knife, and their request for us is we would like DNA from the knife. Let's see if we can see if there's DNA in the blood. Okay. Certainly, we can do that, and we'll report that back to them. But perhaps it doesn't match. Perhaps it doesn't match the subject or the victim. Well, there's also a possibility we could have gotten maybe a latent fingerprint from that, from the knife, or maybe even embedded within the blood. So having those conversations with the agents when they submit the evidence to ensure that we're being asked, to perform all of the examinations saves them time, but it also helps them, ensure that they're driving their case forward by asking for the right kind of forensic examinations.
Okay. So worst comes to worst, does a case ever go dry? And is there anything the lab really can't do? I've also done. I'm doing special projects now for VCU, and I've done a lot of research on cold cases recently. So how do you all in the lab come back to those cases after years of questioning what really happened?
So, does a case go dry? I would answer that by saying I can say that there are certainly leads that are exhausted without further probative value.
Okay.
Meaning, evidence is submitted, we run the required exams, and whether the evidence that we examine produces results, and those results are not helpful to the case, or the evidence does not produce results, either one of those scenarios can lead to a case, quote unquote, going dry. Now, by a matter of policy, from that standpoint, we don't conduct work unless it's requested by the submitter. Conversely, we are not in a position to re-examine evidence previously submitted. Say, for example, you submitted a piece of evidence and the FBI went through it and we said, "Hey, we can't find anything." We won't 2 years from now re-examine the same evidence unless there is something significant that has changed, like an advancement in a certain technique, for an example, or if it was examined by a state and local, and there can be shown that that state and local examining body, like a different laboratory, did not have the full array of capabilities at their hands to find evidence of value, then we would perhaps consider doing a re-examination. So as it relates to policy, we do not request additional examinations, nor would we conduct examinations without the request from the contributor. And so we examine forensically what we're given, what we're charged to.
Okay.
Now, in the field, they re-examine their cases regularly. In fact, there is a case review period that is set for every single investigation. So whether that's a public corruption case or or a case that might be more heavy in the traditional evidentiary value, those cases are re-examined regularly. Okay. If a case moves into an inactive status, it is incumbent upon that investigator and that team of people that he or she works with, as well as the prosecutors, to kind of put a 360 on that case to see if there are additional leads that can be developed or additional direction that the case can be taken in. And this happens all the time. We do assist on certainly, some cold cases, but I think one thing that's special about the FBI is that we are able to put so many different perspectives on a case and different looks at a case that we are oftentimes, or I would say the majority of the times, successful because of those perspectives.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you clarifying that for me. And most people are familiar with the initial steps of a crime scene investigation, which, you touched on that. But what happens when the investigators leave the scene and they come to you? Can you walk us through that and maybe what the process of working in the lab is a little bit more? You touched on it a little bit, but.
Yeah, absolutely. So before they even, so there's even a lot of steps in between leaving the crime scene and submitting to the Sure. laboratory itself. And this Sure. is, everyone sees the on TV piece with the FBI raid jackets and the tents, and they're processing all this Right. Crime scene, and they're boxing up lots of really cool items of evidence. But there's a lot of things that have to happen between that stage and before we ever see a piece of evidence.
Okay.
And some of those things, not all of them conclusively, but some of those things will include a complete inventory of every piece of evidence that was taken. And not only is that for our record keeping, that is actually left as part of the return on the warrant. So they have to have a receipt of everything that was taken as part of the crime scene.
Okay.
Every piece of that evidence is then assigned a property number and is initially entered into the field office's evidence room. So you have this event. You go to the event. You serve your warrant if it's requires that, or if it's a crime scene that just occurred. You process the crime scene. Everything has to be inventoried. Everything has to be accounted for. And the first thing that happens is everything comes back and goes into the evidence room.
Okay.
And then it's during that review, once everything is put into the evidence room, that the determination is made. Well, we have, 86 pieces of evidence from this investigation. What evidence has the most potential value, and what evidence of that has the most potential value do we need to send to the FBI laboratory?
Okay.
And that all does start with a conversation with our evidence management unit. So they're the focal point for the field. That's the people that they will call, and they will say, okay, here's the case. Here's what we're looking to prove. Here's the evidence that we have. We intend to submit the following items. So
Okay.
that gives our evidence management unit kind of a heads up as to the amount of evidence that's coming and what is being requested.
Right.
Additionally, they have to assign it a prioritization. In other words, how much effort and in what speed do we intend to address this evidence? Now, typically things will come in with a standard prioritization. However, if we are talking about certain matters of national security or high-profile cases, the prioritization of those might get bumped up from standard work during normal business hours to sometimes saying we'll work cases 24/7. So once the evidence has been, once the items of evidence have been determined through that conversation with our evidence management unit, and the prioritization has been set, the evidence arrives in the laboratory. And then it's up to the evidence management unit to ensure that the evidence is routed appropriately through the laboratory. And that seems like it would be a fairly easy process. However, depending on the required or the requested examinations, the evidence might have to be routed specifically. As an example, if we just got in a piece of evidence and they wanted to have trace evidence, latents, and DNA performed, we couldn't just send that piece of evidence in any order. In fact, when it comes to latents and DNA specifically, we have to test the item for DNA first before we even take it to the latents department or the latents group, because there are certain, as an example, UV lights that latent fingerprint examiners use that could potentially destroy DNA, much like you can get skin cancer from the UV lights, UV rays of the sun. So it's up to the evidence management unit to ensure the evidence is received, the evidence is cataloged appropriately, the examinations being requested are documented, and then, and just as critically, routed appropriately through the laboratory to ensure that we have a iterative process for the disciplines that are being requested. Once all that is finished, each discipline will prepare their own laboratory report on findings that will be packaged together, and those reports will be electronically disseminated to the case agent, and all of the evidence will be returned to the field office.
Okay. How long does it usually take for a test to go through? You talked about fingerprinting. How long does it usually take for one of those to go to that specific department?
So that is very much a it depends question, and it depends because, as I mentioned, on the case prioritization.
Okay.
So at any one time throughout the year, the FBI laboratory will process thousands of pieces of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So if it comes in with a higher prioritization, it will move through the process quicker.
Okay.
If it comes in as a standard prioritization, we have deadlines that we try to make and that depends. That is discipline specific. The process itself to conduct certain exams certainly is not time intensive, depending on the exam that you're talking about. But to be able to move through that process, to be able to ensure the chain of custody that we are required to have as the FBI to ensure the purity of that piece of evidence, it is, like I mentioned, a very iterative process that we do not hurry, that we ensure is documented appropriately. So nothing happens fast, but that is not because we are not capable of conducting these examinations expeditiously. It's because we want to take our time and make sure that we're providing as much probative value from those pieces of evidence as possible.
Sure. Well, before we get into our game segment, I wanted to ask what advice you had for people like me who want to go into the FBI and do something of interest to them. Is there a certain strategy that you chose when going through your time with the Bureau?
So I'm really glad that you asked that question, because what I have told so many people in just my interactions with them over the almost 3 decades now that I've been here is there is a position in the FBI for you. There are so many jobs, hundreds of job roles within the FBI. Special agents only make up about 50% of the entire FBI family. There are intel analysts, there are photographers, there are forensic operations specialists, there are management and program analysts. I mean, the job roles really just go on and on and on. I would say that it starts with you know an internal feeling of wanting to contribute, wanting to do good, wanting to make this place a safer, better place than the way we found it. And that's how I felt when I initially joined the FBI. I wanted to be able to contribute to the greater good of the organization, but also of for our country. So as far as strategies go, we'd get a lot of people that apply to the FBI. In fact, in our agent ranks, we only put through about 5% of our total applicants that make it all the way to the end. Right. But I think the basis for anybody looking to start in the FBI is going to be that internal desire to do something bigger than oneself. It is often said we don't do this job for the money, we don't do this job for the pats on the back, and all of that is very true. We do this job to make a difference and to pay it forward, if you will. As far as strategy goes, we are we do have a very rigorous process for joining the FBI, and I think part of that should absolutely be mentioned, that it's a the background investigation and the entrance polygraph are certainly two measures of ensuring that we're getting candidates that have demonstrated what it is that the FBI wants to see in their future employees. So I would say that is those are two of the kind of the hurdles on the application process. But we have so many pieces on top of just those full-time positions. We have the collegiate hiring initiative, where we have a kind of a pool of candidates, or we have an application process for those that have graduated from college. We have our very robust internship, our college internship program, which I encourage folks to look at. That usually comes out in the fall for the following summer's internship. There are no shortages of space for anyone interested in becoming part of the FBI. And we have continually strived to make sure that the FBI represents the communities in which we live and in which we serve. So I think another important point to point out is the diversity of our organization, not only in the job roles and the job families, but also our continuing desire to be a diverse organization, to look like the communities that we serve and the communities that we work in, and also to have diversity of background. And I mean that in the classic kind of classical education piece. I mentioned a number of different roles within the FBI: intel analysts, management program specialists, photographers. That goes on and on. Electronics technicians, mechanics. The forensic examiners that we have in the laboratory as another specific discipline. The FBI opens the doors to all of those backgrounds. So one strategy that I've had is don't feel like you have to get a criminal justice degree, or that you have to get a biology degree, or that you have to get an accounting degree or be a lawyer. There are opportunities within the FBI. There are opportunities within the laboratory division itself that promote a very diverse workforce in all of those areas that I mentioned. So my strategy is pick a discipline in your scholastic life that is of interest to you, and I can promise you there's a space in the FBI for that. I mean, we have crime, we have crime art squads. So squads that are just work, stolen art and forgeries. So many, I just, the list goes on and on about the wonderful opportunities in the FBI, and how whatever your interests are in life, there is a space for you in today's FBI.
That's very comforting to hear, and I appreciate you giving that advice to people of my age and my generation. So thank you for that. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back with the game segment. So yeah, we'll be right back.
You're listening to Crime Uncovered.
Welcome back. We are going to start this game segment back here with Ray. So, which FBI agent would you rather be to solve these historic Hollywood cases? So, would you rather solve the cases caused by Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs, or bust the most famous bank robber in the history of the United States in Catch Me If You Can?
Well, that's a great question. I think for me, I mentioned it previously. I think a lot of it comes to impact. What has greater impact? What can help the greater good? So both of these fictitious criminals were certainly very bad, and doing a lot of things that we would not want them to continue. However, I would say I would want to help catch Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lamb, because ultimately he was causing the death of people, and Catch Me If You Can, he was certainly doing, financially, causing harm to lots of people. Sure. But I would say Silence of the Lambs.
All right.
Final answer.
All right. Okay. Start you off easy on that one. So next one, would you rather take down the mafia with a hitman insider and Donnie Brasco, or face off against your arch nemesis in Face Off?
So that one is a little easier. I would say Donnie Brasco.
Oh, really? Okay.
I would say to have that level of awareness that we expect out of those employees, those people that are living those undercover lives to infiltrate things like the mob or the mafia, is something that we invest a lot of effort into, because it's just difficult. It's difficult to have those kind of successes. So right. I would say Donnie Brasco.
All right. Last one. Would you rather investigate a group of intelligent bank robbers in Point Break, or solve the case of a missing person after a cyber attack goes wrong in Criminal Minds?
So while I think anyone would like to be portrayed by Keanu Reeves, and be able to investigate bank robbers dressed as ex-presidents, I think that goes a little bit more back in line with Catch Me If You Can, with the show Criminal Minds, and then being modeled after the behavioral analysis units. I think that they are such a specialty group,
Sure.
And they're able to add such value to investigations. I think that in this case, I would rather be part of the Criminal Minds, the group of Criminal Minds. Plus, it's my daughter's favorite show.
Sure. Yeah. So she can like that too. I got to go the same answers. But yeah, Ray, thanks so much for being here with me today. This is episode 3 of Crime Uncovered. Is there anything else you would like to say about the Bureau and your time in it as well?
Phenomenal job. No excuse to not love this job. I don't hit the snooze button. I come to work still after 28 years every day, excited for what the day is going to bring. If you are ever interested in working for the FBI, please connect with someone that you know works for the FBI. Reach out to your local FBI office. Ask to speak to the recruiter or the applicant coordinator. With over 200 job roles in this organization, there is a seat for everybody, and we welcome all applicants who want to be part of this amazing organization.
I really appreciate it. That's very humbling and very exciting for me as a criminal justice minor and a fan of your work and the FBI's work. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. This is episode 3 of Crime Uncovered with Ray Cook. I appreciate it, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Thank you.
You're listening to Crime Uncovered.